You don't hold people accountable through violence. It's just not how any of this should work. You hold them accountable at the ballot box, through the legal system. That we have these mechanisms. You don't go to a place and shoot anyone. That's not how we do it.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and bring in Pam Smith, who's the CAO of Verified Voting, and the organization is dedicated to strengthening democracy for all voters by promoting the responsible use of technology in elections. Pam, thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Oh, this conversation is rich already.
Yeah, these are heady times, but can you just talk with us about the state of voting rights right now in America as we're heading into such a crucial midterm election?
Yeah. The thing you touched on just last is about accountability. I think that's what elections are all about. They're based on evidence. What's not based on evidence? The insistence that mail ballots are fraudulent in nature. The insistence that non-citizens are voting in large numbers. And the repetition of these debunked claims of malfeasance in past elections, even when those things have been thrown out in court. Here's the thing about that. If you never have to prove your claims because all you have to do is issue another claim or another executive order and then another and then another, it's easy for people to become overwhelmed by that. Mm-hmm. But that chaos is kind of the point. Really, I think Americans love voting and they love elections because elections are about accountability. We've always cherished the ideal that if you don't like them, you can vote them out, right? If you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. This kind of challenge to our elections and to our democratic systems has been going on for some time, but it's really accelerated now. The good news is that elections are a process of continuous improvement, and they have been continuously improving for quite a few years. Back in 2017, elections were declared part of critical infrastructure. And that meant that they could get a lot of help and support on things like cybersecurity from the federal government. And that improved the cybersecurity posture and the security posture generally of elections for elections jurisdictions across the country. That's gone away now, but the gains have not gone away. And election officials are far more ready than they ever were. Another thing that's changed, and I think this is really crucial, is that the whole country, except for Louisiana, and they're in progress, is voting on paper now. So there is a recountable, auditable, physical record. That ballot is a physical record of the intent of voters. That's evidence in any election. That gets used in an audit or a recount, even if you do your initial count by machine, which almost all jurisdictions do. So we're way ahead of where we were a dozen years ago, where at least a quarter of the country was voting on fully paperless equipment. And most jurisdictions now are doing some kind of regular post-election audit, or they have a recount law, or they have both. Are those always perfect? No, they're not always perfect, but elections are run by humans and humans are not perfect. But election officials are among the people who never say it's too hard, ever. So they need our support. Who else never says it's too hard? Voters who have fought for their right to be heard, sometimes over decades, sometimes over generations. And so showing up and voting is one of the key things we can do in these crazy times with all the chaos.
I've worked elections before, and I was always struck by the orchestration of all of it. And, I had to go to classes and I had to get trained up, and, we did mock ballots and we did the whole thing. And I sat next to a a Republican, and we got to chit chat all day, throughout the entire election. And it occurred to me that everyone ought to have to do that. We all need, right? It should be required that everyone work an election in their lives, because you do see how not only how dedicated everyone there is, but also how a conspiracy to corrupt even one precinct means you have to get everyone in that precinct in on the game. Unless there's a hack or something like that. What concerns you most about the midterms?
You've spoken of my theory of life, which is that everyone should have to wait tables at least once in their lifetime, and everyone should be a poll worker. For the midterms, I think part of the challenge is we just don't know what's going to happen. Redistricting has been a lot of fun. Seems like it's mostly done and dusted at this point. Florida, I don't know, but they do have a constitutional prohibition on what they would like to do. So all those changes make more work for election officials. You have to redraw the districts, and you have to make sure the ballots have all the right contests for that particular district. But I have concerns about changing of rules too close to an election. Election officials are really busy right now preparing for upcoming elections. They don't need someone coming in like in Wayne County trying to take their 2024 ballots. Those are in storage. They're busy working on the upcoming, election work and recruiting poll workers and all of those things. And they don't need those things making it harder for them, but they also don't need rule changes about mail-in ballots or, something like the SAVE Act at the federal level, or the SAVE Act Light, I guess you would call it, at state levels, right? Those kinds of rule changes are challenging and hard, and you have to notify voters about the changes as best you can. And that's a, all hands on deck kind of an effort if that happens. Another thing that I think worries some people is, will there be uniforms at polling places, right? And I think there are remedies for some of these things. We may not be able to control the chaos that's coming down at us, but election officials are generally ready for anything. They're very prepared. They have a plan B. They have a plan C in case plan B doesn't work out. But what voters need to do is to have their own plans. And I think there are a number of steps voters can take. One of those steps, I think, is, a potential remedy for the idea that, maybe they're going to put ICE at polling places or something along those lines, and that is to vote early, right? In my state of California, we have a lot of options for voters, and that's great. Not everybody has quite as many options, but we can vote early. We can vote early in person. We can vote absentee. Everybody gets a mail-in ballot who is a registered voter. So you can do that at your kitchen table. You can take it into a polling place and vote it there. You can take it to a drop box. There's so many choices. But the vote early part is the key, because you might be able to, cover some polling places with uniforms on a given day. But when you have multiple days and multiple polling places and vote centers that'll serve anybody in the county, you can go to a different one if yours looks, dicey. That's a real saving grace. And there are other things that voters can do and steps they can take, which I think are really important. Because of possible changes in registration, and even just generally, always check your registration. Check it well in advance before there's any deadline for changing registration or updating it or whatever in your state. Check it, make sure it still says the correct information. If it doesn't, let the election official know there could have been a problem with that database, and you're telling them as sort of a canary in the coal mine if they need to know that. And it lets you make sure that you're ready for election day. The second thing is check your ballot. When you go to vote, if you're voting on a machine, which does print out a paper ballot, your focus still is on the machine. It's on that screen, right? As you're going through the choices. And a lot of people don't pay any attention to that printed thing that comes out at the end. That printed thing is not like your receipt in a grocery store. That's your ballot. It's really important. That's the thing that will get used in recounts and audits. That's the evidence of your intent. So you should look at it, check it carefully, make sure it says what you want it to. If it doesn't, you have a right to start over on a machine that is working as long as you haven't cast it yet. So that's the most important thing to check. If you're voting by mail, use ballot tracking if it's available in your state, and almost every state now has ballot tracking. And ballot tracking tells you when your ballot's on its way to you. It tells you when they've received your ballot, and it tells you when they've included it in the count. And this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread for anybody who's voting by mail. Knowing that it's there is crucially important. If you vote by mail, bank your vote early. Get it in a Dropbox if you can. If you can't, mail it as early as you can, but ballot tracking will let you know that it got back safely. And if it's a few days before the election and it's not checked in yet, then contact your election official for what your alternate options are.